Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to have so many of you listening in live. We're really excited to be able to facilitate today's discussion and for this opportunity to hear from some great experts and leaders who are focused on enacting policies for lasting engagement. Before we get started, I just want to cover a couple of quick housekeeping notes. As a reminder, you cannot be seen or heard. However, you will be able to address any questions to myself or the panelists throughout the discussion by clicking the QA feature at the bottom of your screen. I'll be monitoring those questions and we'll do our best to get to as many as we possibly can. Also, if for some reason you're having technical difficulties, please submit those issues in the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. We do have support staff standing by to help you with that. And last but not least, we are recording this webinar. We will also publish this as quickly as we can after today's session. You'll be receiving an email link with the contents of today's webinar, as well as to a short survey, which will help us continue to refine and improve this content over time. So with that noted, let's go ahead and get started. So I'd love to introduce our expert panels for today. First, we have Tracy Maylett. Tracy is the CEO of DecisionWise, and Tracy's business coaching and consulting background extends over 2 decades and across 5 continents. With experience working in healthcare, technology, retail, government, education, and manufacturing, Tracy has worked on the ground with executives and leadership teams in driving engagement in 30 countries and has extensive experience in this space. As the CEO of DecisionWise, he is also responsible for guiding the overall strategy of his organization and leading large-scale change efforts for clients around the globe. So Tracy, we're thrilled to have you here with us today.
Thanks, Christine. I appreciate it.
Excellent, thank you. Our next panelist is Caitlin Cartwright. Caitlin is the Director of Physician and Provider Recruitment for Dignity Health Medical Foundation based in Sacramento, California. Caitlin has worked with Dignity for the past 16 years and started as their sole recruiter for one medical group. She now leads a team of recruiters, residency outreach liaisons, and coordinators who support physician, APP, and locums recruitment for more than a dozen medical organizations, as well as independent private practices in California, Arizona, and Nevada. Last year, her team signed more than 170 new providers throughout these 3 states. Caitlin lives in Sacramento with her husband, 2 daughters, and a new COVID puppy. Caitlin, it's nice to have you.
Thanks, Christine.
I also have a COVID puppy. I highly recommend it. Okay. Next, we have Rana Smith. So Rana has been at Seattle Children's since 2005. She spent 10 years in the otolaryngology clinic, and then moved on to develop and lead the newborn rounder team that staffs 2 regional hospitals. She was also the first to hold the APP Education Manager role, where she led the effort to develop innovative ways to train and onboard new APPs, most notably in their nationally accredited APP Fellowship Program. Rana serves as clinical faculty for the University of Washington School of Nursing, and as a nurse, Rana has spent many years working with the pediatric pulmonary population at Mary Bridge Children's Hospital, specializing in cystic fibrosis and asthma. And Rana was also recently named Chief of APP Service at Seattle Children's. So Rana, congratulations and welcome.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we have Amy Powell. Amy is the Director of Provider Recruitment and Retention at Reed Health in Richmond, Indiana. Amy leads the medical staff development team, who on average recruit over 70 permanent clinicians per year. They also facilitate their locum scheduling, and Amy leads onboarding and retention efforts for the Reed medical staff. She is a fellow of the Association of Advancing Physician and Provider Recruitment, and is also a member of the Indiana Society of Physician Recruiters, where she co-chairs the membership committee. Amy, nice to have you. Welcome.
Thank you, Christine.
Great. And as for myself, I have been passionate about culture for a very long time and really have built a career around creating engaging, innovative workplace environments that allow people to thrive and business to prosper. I am the Vice President of Culture and Engagement for CHG Healthcare, and in my role, I focus on understanding and driving employee engagement through leadership practices, cultural programs, and philanthropic efforts. And I'm thrilled to be moderating today's discussion, and thank you all for joining us. So as we talked about in the registration, times are changing and panel, I can't thank you enough for taking the time out of your busy days to spend with us, just thinking about how our environments are changing and then subsequently how employee engagement will need to change with all of this evolution happening around us. I know for CHD Healthcare, we have been building our culture story for almost 20 years, and we're going to fundamentally have to rethink the way engagement works for us in the future. And that's really the focus of our conversation today is how are each of you thinking about engagement and how it will need to change in the future? And I'd like to start with the basics. I often find that we talk about the term engagement, but oftentimes we think it means different things. So I'm going to start with our resident engagement expert in Tracy and ask you, Tracy, just to ground us out in this concept of engagement. What is engagement and how does employee engagement drive business performance?
Thanks, Christine. So basically, employee engagement, the basic definition of that is it's an emotional state in which we feel passionate, energetic, and committed towards our work. And in return, we fully invest our best selves, our hearts, our spirits, our minds, and hands to give in that discretionary effort into what we do. So that's the basic concept of engagement. Understand that engagement includes two elements. As I mentioned, the hearts, spirits, minds, and hands. The hearts and spirits are the love and passion we have for the job. So that's a feeling that we have. And I think one of the reasons for so much confusion over what engagement really is we've always thought engagement was a feeling. We feel engaged. When in reality, engagement is two parts. It's also doing. That's the hands and the minds piece. We commit ourselves to make it happen. So it's important to understand that, particularly during COVID, that we need to not just focus on how are we feeling during this time, but also what's being done in return. You asked a question regarding what are some of the business implications of engagement. I'll just read you a couple of these that we found just recently. So companies with low engagement scores earn an operating income of 32.7% lower than companies with more engaged employees. Similarly, companies with highly engaged workforce experience 19% higher growth in operating income over a 12-month period of time. So there's some definite business pieces there. Give you a couple more. Engaged companies grow profits as much as 300% faster than their competitors. Highly engaged employees are 87% less likely to leave the organization. So lots of things there. When we look at it in terms of healthcare, we use the term EX equals CX or PX. So the patient experience is a direct reflection of my employee experience. So some of the interesting studies we've been doing lately is being able to tie engagement directly to things such as flash or infection rates in a unit. Very interesting, the correlation that exists between something like that. Morbidity and mortality even, we've been able to tie some things to that. Use of sick leave, unpaid leave or unplanned leave, benefits utilization, attrition, all of this fits into the business impact of employee engagement.
That's great, Tracy. So it's not just a feel-good initiative. It's a solid business strategy. And I will say, CHG really intentionally put employee engagement at the center of our business strategy. And we have seen that same result you're indicating. We have seen our performance improve over time, and we have outperformed our competitors by focusing on our employees and focusing on their engagement. So I can say firsthand, we've seen that concept prove out. We often find people still struggle with how to understand engagement and how to influence it. We've used your magic model of engagement at CHG quite extensively with good success. Would you mind just walking people at a high level through what the magic model is?
I'd be happy to. So the magic model is actually an acronym, MAGIC, M-A-G-I-C, and it's based on research that we started about 8 years ago. So at that time, we took about 14 million employee survey responses, and those came from over 70 countries. So these are employees that have been surveyed about all aspects of employee satisfaction, well-being, and engagement. And what we were trying to do is understand, are there any commonalities behind these? And what we did is, through this research and correlative studies, we were able to determine there were really 5 or 6 key elements that related to engagement. What we've done is we've simplified these into a model that stands for M is meaning. So meaning is finding greater purpose in what you do and in the work behind the purpose behind your work. When employees find meaning in their roles, they're much more likely to be engaged. The second component we found, which is the A, is autonomy. And autonomy is not, the A is not anarchy, it's autonomy. It is not free. It's not a free for all for everybody. What it says is I'm given very concrete guidelines, but within those guidelines, I'm free to operate in a way that allows me to bring my best self to work. We're seeing a lot of that now with autonomy in work from home environments. I was reading some interesting articles this morning in the Wall Street Journal about some of the things that we're starting to see about work at home surveillance, wondering what that's going to do to autonomy now that that's being introduced. So meaning autonomy. The G is for growth. Interesting studies that have come out over the last couple of years regarding millennials in particular, which make up anywhere from 49 to 55% of our workforce, depending on where you're at. Millennial number one factor in terms of staying with the organization, engaging, is actually, do I have growth opportunities? Mm. And growth does not necessarily mean promotion, putting a senior in front of your name. It's that challenge that exists, that I come to work, I'm not stagnating. So meaning autonomy, growth. The next one is impact. I have to see the results of my effort. If I feel like I'm coming to work and spinning my wheels and not getting anything done, I will not engage in what I do. Mm-hmm. The last one that's probably gained more importance over the last year than any others is connection. It's a sense of belonging to something greater than yourself. Many people find connection with their peers, the people they work with, but connection is also a sense of belonging to an organization. I belong to CHG. I'm part of CHG. Mm-hmm. CHG is part of me. It could be a connection to tasks or the job itself or the people of that job. But we find when meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection are present, people will tend to engage. Notice I didn't say anything about perks. That's not one. There's not a P in the magic model. These are the true factors that will cause permanent or long-lasting engagement versus that temporary burst in satisfaction.
That's great, Tracy. And again, we've used that model with great success. So thank you for developing that and helping us understand how to apply actions to improving engagement for our people. So with that grounding in mind, and we're all working from a common definition and framing for engagement, I'd like to kind of open up to the panel. 2020 has really introduced all kinds of new challenges for all of us as business leaders. How has 2020 and all of the recent changes affected engagement in your organizations? Can I start with you, Amy? What are you finding in your organization?
Sure. I think that absolutely 2020 has thrown us a couple curveballs. We are actively working hard on things like onboarding and retention. So I hope to touch on that later. Mm-hmm. I think it's key to, we were even starting those projects prior to the pandemic starting, but we are focusing in and kind of changing and adapting as we go along. So that's kind of what I'm going to bring to this conversation is onboarding and retention aspects.
That's great. I mean, I'm looking forward to double clicking into that. Those are important in the best of times, and I'm sure it's given you some challenges to rethink those initiatives. Rana, how is engagement changing in your organization with all the developments this year?
Well, we actually just completed our press gaining engagement survey, so
okay, so you can speak with confidence.
Well, except that we don't have results yet. So, but
okay.
Hopefully soon we'll be able to tell. And I think what I'm going to bring to this conversation is some just real world experience of how we manage the flow of communication in our organization, and not only communication out, but communication back in to the leadership team. So I'll be more about that.
Yeah, thank you. Again, I think communication is critical in the best of times and even more critical in the worst of times. So I think that's a key ingredient to what we're trying to solve for here. Caitlin, what about you? What are you finding with engagement this year?
I think about engagement in two different ways. There's kind of the larger level organizational wide engagement, and then there's what I can do for the team that I support. So organizationally speaking, when COVID hit, I think it changed everyone's focus, and really everyone's needs became very immediate and sometimes, very dire. So I was really happy to see our organization kind of take care of those people. And the thought was that if we take care of people and we care for the people, that will engage them for the long term, much as Tracy spoke to. So, putting into place programs where if a provider was to be exposed to COVID on the job, and they had to quarantine for 14 days, the organization paid for that entire administrative leave period. Folks were allowed to go into arrears on their PTO. Many of us have kids. All of a sudden, we're working and our children are schooling from home. And we need some time to kind of organize ourselves. So we could go into arrears on our PTO. Very simple things for frontline providers at our hospitals and facilities. Mini marts sprouted up so that instead of working this shift and having to go to the grocery store, they could pick up ready-made meals or produce, dairy products in the hospital, so that we were really trying to take care of our people. I was really happy to see that there were some furloughs. There were some folks who were impacted negatively in terms of their volume. And so their FTE status changed, which impacted their benefits. And the organization stepped up and said, we're gonna cover your benefits in full while we're in this situation. You are down hours through no fault of your own, and we understand you have families that need to be taken care of. And organizationally speaking, I think that makes a big difference. People feel cared for in the moment when the crisis is happening. And then as an employee who, I'm not on the front line, so these things didn't impact me directly, it engages me because I feel good about working for an organization that does this for people. So I think it has a broader impact than there's just those that need that grocery store in the hospital. So I think they really were nimble and thought on their feet and moved quickly. And I was happy to see that.
Yeah, that's great. I think, it ties back to Tracy's definition of engagement, the connection that you created by quickly adapting and taking care of your people. And then that also helps connect them to the company, the leadership team, and helps them feel meaning in why they're coming to work every day. So that's great to hear. Thank you so much, Caitlin. So, with that high level introduction, I do want to start kind of going a little deeper into some of these practices that we have all fundamentally had to rethink over the last 4 months. And Rana, I'd like to start with you. You mentioned communication. And, again, I know we all recognize the importance of communication, but it's even more critical right now during difficult times. How are you using communications to keep your teams close and connected and keep your business driving forward? Rana, could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. And I'm going to talk mostly about my own team, which is the APPs at Seattle Children's. There are a little over 300 of us, so it's a pretty good sized team. Like probably everybody who is listening to this webinar, and certainly all of you, every single healthcare organization out there had to put a communication plan in place quickly when COVID hit. And like many institutions, we have had an emergency operations center set up very quickly. And that was the conduit for most information to come out centrally. And the EOC sent out a daily broadcast via email. And we quickly set up a website on our intranet that was the repository of the most up-to-date information regarding any issue related to COVID, which was very helpful because things changed very quickly. I mean, if you remember back to the early days when you could say something in the morning and the story was different later in the afternoon, which it was just head-spinningly fast, the situation with contingency staffing, predictions, testing, PPE, just you name it, everything, the situation on the ground was changing very, very quickly. As things stabilized a little bit, we were able to put into place a pretty good cadence of communication to our APP team. And so I just want to describe what we did, sort of starting from the top down. My manager team is 7 people, and the 2 that have the most direct reports and I huddle once a week, and we sort of preview what's coming up for the week and predict any potential fires that might be happening and sort of divvy up the firefighting at the beginning of the week. And then the manager team as a whole huddles once a week to report up on what's happening in the teams. And then there's a supervisor group of about 30 people, and they're the ones that manage the frontline workers, APPs. And we've really tried to encourage as much two-way conversation and communication as possible. I rely on the supervisors to be rounding with their teams and bringing information back centrally to let us know what is the situation. I mean, right now, I would say that our main focus of information gathering is what is our status now that we found out that school won't be starting in the fall, and we're back in this situation of people trying to maintain work hours and work from home and homeschool their kids. So we're trying to identify what is the situation, who is going to be in trouble, and what can we put in place now to help mitigate that situation. So that's very high on our priority list at the moment. The other thing that we found was really useful was to do all staff forums. Now, we've done these for our APP group in the past, particularly when something big happened or there was a big announcement or maybe there was some bad news that needed to be relayed. We would have all staff forums and our chief medical officer would come and speak to the APP group. We can't really do that now. So we certainly can't all get together in a room and have a nice Q&A session. So we did do this via a webinar type of environment. And in the past, when we did it in person, we would try to do 3 episodes of the same meeting, one early in the morning, one in the middle of the day, and one in the early evening, hoping to catch all shifts because we do, work 24 hours a day. Which was always, I thought, a little bit of a weak spot because for each of those meetings, it was a different experience for the people that attended. It was a slightly different set of questions and answers. And so this format actually works better for that. So we are able to record our sessions and then publish them out to the group. And so if they can't attend, then they can watch the meeting later on, and everybody then gets the exact same information, which I think is actually a more effective way to deliver that kind of discussion. And then the other thing that we did was we collected questions for those forums for about 2 weeks ahead of time. Mm-hmm. So our program coordinator would send out a request for questions repeatedly. Mm-hmm. We're getting tons of email, and it's easy for things to get lost in email, but she would send repeated requests for questions, and then she would group them together so that there weren't duplicates in the questions. And then we'd give our speakers the preview of the questions so that they would know what is the concern, what are people thinking about, and definite themes arose. And as you can imagine, rumor control is a really important piece of that communication. It was very important right off the bat to get on top of discussions about layoffs and furloughs and hours being cut, because it was very important for accurate information to get out there as quickly as possible. So I'll stop there, and then I'll be happy to discuss more questions later.
Yeah, that's really helpful. It sounds like you've always prioritized communications, but mm-hmm. you've dialed that up significantly. So
and just did it in a different way. Oh, one thing I forgot to say that I wanted to mention in terms of connection, Tracy, when I was writing down your magic model, which I'd love to learn more about, I realized that we accidentally do a couple of those letters. Intentionally, but we do accidentally do. And one important piece about connection that I would like to point out: when you're all working from home, you can't be in the same room, in the same meeting room together. It's important to encourage people to be on camera versus just calling in by phone. And we did find that really increased the quality of the conversation in those smaller meetings.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great, Ron. And I think you highlighted a silver lining that I think some of us have uncovered, which is it seems counterintuitive that video connections can be in some ways as strong as in person, because it creates an equivalent experience for everyone. Yes, so exactly. Any other panelists want to speak to how communications has changed since COVID and how you're using communications as an employee engagement lever? All right, so let's continue moving forward. Caitlin, I want to direct this next question to you. So Tracy spoke earlier about some of the different ways employee engagement drives business performance. And as you mentioned, there's employee engagement at the organizational level, and then there's driving employee engagement at a team level. And I'd love you to kind of share some examples with us of how you've used employee engagement to drive individual or team performance during this period of COVID. Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. Quickly, I realized I can't impact people's PTO or set up a grocery store. So I needed to kind of sit down and think, here's my team. There's about 14 of us. and how are we going to support each other? So I sent out, I drafted a really quick survey and sent it out to my team, and quickly became aware of, there were 3 primary needs that people had. And that's what I wanted to focus on. My engagement right now wasn't so much based on the results of our annual employee engagement survey, where people may be interested in career development or growth at that moment. Now there were some immediate needs. So the starting point was, what do you need to be successful to work remotely? My team was working from home 1 day a week. It's a big jump to go from full-time 5 days a week, kids there, the dog's over here. What do you need? So it was talking about, you need a monitor, you have a laptop, do you have a docking station? You're working at your kitchen table now and your back is bothering you, let's get you your chair from the office and get that to you. Really simple things, but when you can create a work environment to the best of your ability that provides comfort, the technology, and the ability to focus, then your productivity doesn't suffer as a result of your changing working environment.
Yeah.
The second thing was communication. We are very used to walking around our office and catching up. I round every day on my team. You need something, you peek around the wall. We didn't have that anymore. So as Rhonda noted, once people got used to this kind of video feel, I did ask everybody to be on camera. Wear your baseball cap, put on your, whatever you want to do, sit outside. I wasn't real strict about that, but let's see you. And then it was meeting the needs of communication on both sides. So some people, we were WebEx and Zoom chatting to a fairly well. And then I received feedback from members of my team that said, it's too much for me. I feel like there's always something dinging on my computer or ringing and buzzing. So we said, okay, let's look at this. Let's set up channels. So we have a channel on Zoom that's dedicated to physician recruitment, a channel that's dedicated to our new applicant tracking system, and a channel that's dedicated to personal home life. So as you all know, you can set your reminders so that, if you want to know everything that's going on with the ATS, you're on it. If you don't care right now where there's a big stock of toilet paper and Lysol wipes, you can get to that later. Yeah. Some people want to know that. They want to know the Costco on Folsom has some TP, go get it. So it was able to have those types of conversations that we would normally have in the office, but limit the exposure for those that didn't need it all the time. The third piece was, I had folks that were feeling really isolated. I personally have not been alone for about 4 or 5 months. So that didn't occur to me, but there are folks that, it was very isolating. And so I kind of brought back a strategy that I had used when we were all in person, and I coined it a coffee chat. And what I told the team was that a couple of hours a month, please use some work time, your normal 8 to 5, carve out an hour and reach out to a colleague. And if you want to have a Zoom call or a FaceTime call where you're not talking about work, but you're connecting, I encourage you to do that. If you feel safe meeting outside getting some iced tea, we're pretty much on lockdown here in California, in Sacramento specifically, but if there's a place to meet at the park and walk your dogs, go during work hours. I'm not asking you to go afterwards, because those connections that we have when we're at the office, they disappear. And so it can't always be about the work. We have to have people feel like they are working with their colleagues. And then, giving people that flexibility to use some of their work time to connect with their colleagues, giving them the flexibility to set the parameters of their chats and notifications, the flexibility to set up their home office in a way that worked for them, even if it meant bringing work products to their home. It's paid off. And one example that came to mind is I have a recruiter on my team, relatively new. She's been with us for about 4 months when everything kind of went on shutdown. She was 2,000 miles from her family, 2,000 miles from friends, just new to the community, had an elderly mother back at home and 3 grown children, one of whom actually came down with COVID. And obviously as a parent and a daughter, she's feeling very torn about what to do. She's new, so she still wants to perform as well as possible. And so we spoke, and she ended up driving home, 2,000 miles to home, and we worked out a system. So she worked Pacific time. So she worked later in the evenings where she were and started later in the day. She was there for every meeting that I had. She attended every call. She was producing every report that she always had. Working with her leaders, there was no change in the quality or amount of her service. And I think taking away the isolation and the worry from her day allowed her to focus on the work. And I think it just builds some gratitude. People feel grateful for the flexibility and the autonomy that Tracy mentioned, to be able to take care of their personal lives and it doesn't detract from their ability to perform. Of course, we have a business need, so I still had to think, like, how am I going to measure this? It feels really good, but how am I going to see it's working? So, what I was able to go back and look, and between March and June, we signed 47 new providers, which I felt really good about because we had a big stop at all of our interviews. We had candidates who were going to sign that said, maybe now is not the right time. So 47 signs in that time period felt great to me. All of our reports were continuing to be produced. So number of interviews, number of open positions, number of offers, signs, that stayed constant. I stayed closer to my leaders, the leaders of our medical groups, to find out that the quality of their customer service. Was it changing? Were you able to reach your recruiter? Were you getting what you needed? Not a single complaint, not a single distraction from what they were used to receiving. So I felt that we were still providing the service that's expected of us, and I expect of my team. And we were able to be flexible to allow people to care for themselves and their family and their work environment. And that taking care of people, I think, allowed us to still be productive and effective.
Yeah, those are some great examples, Caitlin, of being agile, to your point, and flexible. And I'm really glad Tracy outlined the magic model, because I think you're each kind of seeing some of those tiebacks that you may not have known about. The connection is critically important, and communication, to your point. Some people want more than others, so creating ways for those employees that want more, that they can get it, but without overwhelming employees that don't. We did have one audience question about communications, and especially in this world of video conferencing. The question is, what if employees don't want to invite everybody into their homes and let you see where they live and their families? And I would just say, at least from my perspective, most video conferencing tools today do have a background feature, a virtual background feature. And if your video conferencing capabilities don't allow that, I would encourage you to connect with your provider, because that is an incredibly valuable feature for maintaining privacy for employees that don't feel quite as comfortable. But Caitlin, really great examples. Thank you so much for helping map that out for us. Amy, I want to move over to you. So we talked earlier about onboarding and retention, and again, those are key priorities for healthy organizations all the time, but fundamentally gets disrupted when we're in a period like we are right now. How are you approaching onboarding through 2020 and beyond?
Sure. So I'm here in Indiana, so things are a little bit different, a little more open compared to California. We have been able to, we had a period of time where things went completely virtual, but we are opening things back a little bit and are able to gather. So we are getting back to what I would think is more of a normal state. Of course, safe pathways are something that we're very focused on, and creating those for our clinicians as well as our employees and patients. So we're always keeping that in mind. For us, our onboarding focus started pre-COVID. We knew organizationally that onboarding our clinicians into our health system was one of the key things that we needed to do better at. It's a huge process. So from the time of signing a contract through their start date, and that first year of employment really is what we consider the onboarding period. So we're working together with all departments here. So we had kicked off this meeting in February, early February, and brought together about 70 key stakeholders here at Reed. We all worked on value stream maps to make sure that we understood as an organization how we were contacting the physician or the APP from the time they, like I said, signed to their start date and through that first year. And what we came to find was everyone was doing it a little differently. Multiple parts of the organization were asking the same thing over and over. So we weren't really thinking about it from the standpoint of what's it feel like to be that clinician in this confusing state of transition and being asked over and over for different things that I've already provided to them. So we're really laser focused on creating a streamlined, purposeful contact with our clinicians as they're onboarding here, and really feel that that's going to help us with our retention. If you're going to onboard correctly, and make that experience enjoyable so that that person can get up to speed faster, we feel that we will retain our clinicians better.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So can we transition a little bit to the topic of retention kind of more broadly? So to your point, onboarding really sets the tone for an employee experience and plays a key role in long-term retention. But talk to us a little bit about how you're approaching retention in general and how this COVID crisis may have you rethinking some of your retention efforts for the future.
Sure. So retention is also a huge topic here at Reed. Our current chief of staff has been bringing a lot of retention and resilience efforts forward during her 2 years as chief of staff. She started a new committee called the PERK Committee. I know, Tracy, you were talking about perks and how those might not be the things that retain people, but this committee stands for Physician Engagement and Resilience Committee. They have touched all different areas of the organization, including focusing in on the physician lounge, the clinician lounge, redoing that, making it a place where they can connect with each other. I think in the inpatient, outpatient world that we live in now, the physician lounge isn't what it used to be. It used to be that place where everybody would bump into one another and ask how their day was going and learn about their family. Well, we don't have that anymore as much. So we are focused on providing a better experience in our lounge, bringing people together to eat together, talk about those, if you're going to have commensality, you're going to, talk to people about their world and what's impacting them. So giving them an outlet. We've also put some exercise equipment in and have different areas that allow them to either relax or work. So that's one thing that the committee did. Some other things that we're doing organizationally, resilience-wise. So student loan debt is a huge resilience issue for clinicians that are coming out of training. And we have engaged an outside student loan service that provides tailored student loan advice to physicians. It's not a company, it's a company that we pay. They're not trying to make money off of our physicians or refinancing their loans, but actually helping them through the process about all the different options that are available. And something new during this pandemic is the CARES Act. And what's that mean? And how do you need to be treating your loans now, delaying those payments? What does that mean? So things like that are focusing in on retention and resilience. Some other things that we've done that are probably going to go away. We started out last year doing things like cooking classes and providing, get-togethers. Right now, that's not going to happen, but maybe we'll get back there someday.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot to think about, and I like your acronym PERKS, and I think, I'm not sure, Tracy, if you would agree with me, but I think the classic kind of ping pong table and all the amenities is what people associate with engaging perks. My perspective is the perks are really an enabler for creating human connection. And it sounds like that's how you're thinking about it as well. So perks in and of themselves are not necessarily negative. It's how you use them and how you intend for your employees to experience them. So that's great. Thank you so much, Amy. Funnel, anything else you would want to add so far based on what we've discussed? Okay, so let's move on. So one of the challenges that we're working through at CHG, and I know many companies are, is what do you do with a distributed workforce? And in a lot of cases, we're going to have hybrid environments where we have people in the office, people working full-time remote, people working sometimes in the office, sometimes from home, which fundamentally changes the way you think about employee engagement. So Tracy, I'd like to start with you. What are some tips for organizations and leaders today who are thinking about increasing engagement in this new way of working? What advice do you have for our audience?
I think what we've heard today makes a lot of sense. Great tips of how we're doing things today. I think Amy used the word purposeful. I appreciated that very much. We use the word intentionality, purposeful. the idea here that we're being much more intentional or much more purposeful about when we do communicate with individuals and work with groups and teams. To answer your question, let me give you some statistics that we found over the last little bit. Excuse me for throwing out the numbers here, but I think it's important we understand what's happened with engagement over the last little while. So engagement this is based on, we've now gathered responses from about 40 million survey responses, so we have a lot. And in the last 5 years, engagement hit its all-time low in October of last year. Really kind of interesting. This is a time when things are going really well and everything's wonderful and rosy, and I can go down the road, and unemployment here in Utah, for example, was as low as 2%. So, I mean, I could go get a job if I wanted to get a job. And it hit an all-time low still in October. So what was interesting is what's happened with engagement since then. And getting to your question, just a couple of statistics. So I'm using a benchmark number. Benchmark is our overall figure. And back in October, the question was asked somewhere along the lines of the level of stress in my job is manageable. So that back in October hit an all-time low. And that was about 65% of respondents responded favorably to that question. Guess what happened in March? That dived significantly. That went down to about 40% favorable. So people were very stressed at the time. Our survey just came out about 2 weeks ago. Ended up in April is about 77%, and May was about the same as was June. So that level of stress has eased somewhat. So a couple of other ideas. Confidence in my organization's future. Our benchmark was 79%. In October of last year, it went down to 43%. So people in October weren't convinced their organization was going to survive. We thought that people would be even less convinced that their organization would survive. As of the end of June, 95% favorable.
Wow.
So pretty interesting what's happened with that result over the last little while. Last one, and this hits on one of Caitlin's points here. The organization cares about employees, and particularly the supervisor. My supervisor cares about me as a person. Our benchmark was 73%. In March of this year, that went down to 63%. The end of last month, that's gone up to 86%. So to partially answer your question, what's happened over the last little while and why engagement has actually increased is the fact that we're being much more purposeful and much more intentional about what we're doing. We're communicating. As we heard from each one of these panelists, one of the things that's happening is managers realize that I have to intentionally communicate with people, whereas before I could catch them at the water cooler or pass them in the hall or whatever that was. There's no passing in the hall anymore.
Right.
We have to communicate differently, and I as a manager need to reach out. I as a manager need to reach out and see, do you have the tools you need to do your job at home? And that's different than what we used to do. We assumed that communication was taking place. So in answer to your question, there's some things that are causing engagement to increase. That intentionality, that fact that managers now have to care. There's also a factor that I'm kind of grateful that I have my job today, whereas back in October, I wasn't as grateful. Another thing is we're all fighting against a common enemy that we weren't fighting against before. Previously, the enemy was the organization. Now it's COVID and the situations that we're fighting. So we're all in this fight together. The concern is going to be with the remote workforce is, will we stop dropping that? Will we drop that intentionality?
Yeah.
Meaning we're getting so used to this, it becomes the new normal, as we say, and we revert back to where we were before. I don't have to communicate as much as I was doing. Look at your own organizations. I would venture to guess that communication has dropped somewhat in the last month, whereas before it was daily in regular communications. So in order to keep our workforce remotely engaged, we have to understand that intentionality and that purpose still has to be there. We still have to intentionally show them that we care about them. We have to intentionally communicate with them. We have to intentionally ask the questions, because remotely we can't do that as much anymore unless we're intentional about it.
Yeah, that really fascinating statistics, Tracy. It's so much has changed in such a short period of time, but that's really interesting insight around how our people are working through this and how the events have affected the way they think about engagement. That's excellent. Thank you so much. Panel, anything you would want to add to how you're thinking about, you shared with us some practices, but anything you'd add to what Tracy offered in terms of how you think about engagement with a distributed workforce for the future?
I'll just say, Christine, that in this world right now, I felt that I've needed to provide some very tangible results to the engagement. I think sometimes, again, when we think about career development, that can take a long time, and you have to kind of work out a plan and a process, and it can take 12 or more months to see and feel that development happen. But we didn't really have that luxury. So it was, what do you need now, and what can I help you with now, so that you feel right now that we're working together, we're partnering together. And so that was a little bit of a change for me, because I needed to really give some thought about what people needed and how I'd be able to produce that with the limitations that I have as well as everybody else has. So that gave me some good thought, and I think that we've come through with some real tangible things, but definitely different from how I have perceived engagement prior to COVID.
Yeah, that's great, Caitlin. And it leads me to a question which I'd like to pose to the panel is, we're talking a lot about the importance of the role of a leader and the importance of a leader showing care and compassion, understanding each person's unique circumstances and what might be needed for them to best perform and stay engaged, helping employees manage through stress and burnout. So a question I want to tee up to the panel is, how are you taking extra care of your leaders? Because that's a lot more pressure on them. And how are you maintaining your own personal engagement through this period? So anyone willing to kind of talk about how you're thinking about leader or self-engagement?
I'll answer without answering the question.
Okay.
I'm a consultant. That's what we do, right? So the idea here is one of the things that we found with engagement that's really interesting is that engagement is local. And I think this was mentioned, that engagement actually happens here locally, not at the top of the organization. And despite the fact that I worked in HR for 2 decades, the idea that HR really creates engagement is a fallacy. Engagement happens locally. And so the importance of a manager or leader in the engagement process is absolutely huge. We find through a lot of correlative studies that we do that as much as 70% of my engagement actually depends on the manager.
Yeah.
Only less than 10% depends on what happens at the organizational level. So Christine, your question, I don't have an answer to that necessarily, other than to say, to reinforce the idea that engagement is local, and the managers are so key to this, to making it happen. Unless we're also focused on taking care of those managers, they're much more likely to disengage. One other statistic that I'll share with you, and that is when a manager is engaged in his or her job, employees are 8 times more likely to be engaged in their roles as well. It's called emotional contagion. My emotions are contagious. So if we're not taking care of those managers, we have to understand that it rolls downhill.
Yeah.
It's their employees aren't being taken care of as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's such an interesting area. At CHG, we've kind of had this mantra, leaders are people too. And I think sometimes in business, we take for granted that, we'll get our leaders to do this, we'll get the leadership team to do this. And I just think it's important to raise that leaders are people too, and they are struggling themselves personally. So maintaining a key priority and focus on how you're going to keep your leaders' tanks full. And then as executives and senior leaders, how are you taking care of yourselves so that you can be best positioned to kind of help people through this, since it's looking to be a marathon more than a sprint, unfortunately, for all of us. Panel, anything else you would add about leader engagement or self-engagement? We're wrapping up. We're coming close on time, but I think it's an important topic. I'd love to hear from anyone else.
I can say for me, for better or for worse, I don't have anybody between myself and my team. So, for a little while, it was drinking from the fire hose with 13 people coming with what they need. And, I'd be on phone calls and meetings and people were in tears, just I think from the stress and the anxiety. And so it was, I really had to put some of the day-to-day work a little bit to the side and really spend time every day just focusing, reaching out to my people individually. Group huddle meetings where we had activities, and that's great, but where people can really kind of talk is a one-on-one situation. So I spent a lot of time in the beginning really finding out the individual needs and concerns of my team. As a parent, I'm really good at putting my needs off to the side. So there was a point where I realized I gotta take a moment here for myself and take a break, get up from my desk, walk the dog, and I really wasn't doing that. And I started to feel, as I was taking on everyone's stuff and trying to help them get grounded again, I wasn't doing it for myself. So it was a very insightful lesson, and I'm doing a little bit better at that now. But it's the simple things of stopping. You know, you can come into your work office and really not leave until, you know, dinner has to be made, and that's not healthy for any of us. And I'm giving this advice to my team, but I'm not taking it. So,
Yeah.
you know, and I got caught. I was on a meeting one time and talking about things, and I said, oh, well, I'll do that. And one of my recruiters like, you know, Caitlin, you kind of do that. Why don't you delegate that to your team? And I was like, oh, thanks for calling me out. That was a great idea. Let's do that. And it was a real wake up for me. And I'm glad she said it. She said it in a very lovely way. And it reminded me that I don't have to always take care of everyone for everything.
Right.
And so that was a good moment for me.
I love that, Caitlin. That's put your mask on first before assisting others. There's something to be said about that. And I think in this time especially, it's really an important reminder for all of us. Well, panel, we're about up on time, but I wanted to kind of give you each an opportunity if there was anything else you wanted to share before we wrap, and also remind our audience if you have any questions, any last minute questions you'd like to ask our panel, this would be the time to do it. But panel, anything else you'd like to share that you haven't had an opportunity to discuss already?
I would just say one thing about how this COVID situation actually in so many ways brought out the best in our teams, and really highlighted what we can do when we have to do it.
Yeah.
We saw so much teamwork and so much collaboration and some amazingly fast responses. For instance, our pivot to telemedicine from in-person visits. I've never seen such a big project happen so quickly in our organization, and the response and the positive response from patients and families is just tremendous. And that this whole idea of remote visits will not go away even when COVID goes away, because we serve a huge geographical area, and it's just easier for patients and families to be able to do remote visits when possible. And that kind of positive response to an emergency situation was very satisfying for the leadership that put it together, and satisfying for the frontline staff that made it happen.
That's a great point, Rana. I think all of us can think about unexpected positive outcomes from all of this, and really seeing what we're capable of and kind of slaying all of those conventional wisdoms of what we can't do. And when you have no choice, it's amazing what you can do. So I know we've seen a lot of those same sort of unexpected benefits of this whole experiment we're going through. Thank you so much. Amy, Tracy, anything you'd like to add before we start closing up?
Sorry, having a trouble unmuting myself. I just want to thank CHG for the opportunity. I appreciate to being asked for this, to participate in this, and I welcome if there's any questions that I can help with onboarding or retention efforts that are going on here at Reed. I'd be happy to address those.
Oh, that's great, Amy. We're thrilled you joined us. It's been super great having you on the panel. Tracy, Caitlin, anything else?
I just want to say, I think it's wonderful that you're addressing this. In times like this, we're often thinking that people should just be grateful to have a job. And that's not obviously the way we need to be looking at this. The patient experience is a direct reflection of the employee experience. And so it does continue on. And it's not something that we can just sit back and say, well, we're in a time of crisis, we don't have to focus on it. So I applaud CHG for addressing this right now.
Well, we appreciate that, Tracy. You've been a great partner to us over the years, so it only made sense to have your voice in this conversation as well. Right. Caitlin, anything else you'd like to add before we wrap?
You know, I think engaging with our staff and our employees, it's similar sometimes to engaging with our providers when we're doing recruitment. And oftentimes I will remind our groups or our leaders, you know, at the bottom, base of it all, everyone would like to feel wanted. Everyone would like to feel valued. And this doesn't mean you have to give them everything they ask for. I did see there was a question in the chat about holding employees accountable for some of their own needs. And I completely agree with that. And I'm sure we've all had experiences where staff have come in and I want or I need this, and it's not my job to give that to you. I will help you design a plan. I'll partner and support you as we work to help you achieve your goals, even if that goal is not in my department anymore. We've promoted people out of my team. But I think that how you treat people and how you make people feel helps to engage them. And that's whether it's your recruiter or whether it's a physician that we're trying to recruit who's interviewing in 5 other places. That speaks to me as a person. And so that's something that I bring and I ask my team to bring to the work that they do.
Yeah, that's really well said, Caitlin. And the biggest challenge I think I've experienced in this space is just that. How do you balance accountability and engagement? How do you mitigate entitlement? There's probably a whole book in that answer, which we unfortunately won't be able to get to today, but Tracy's probably already working on. So, well, we are up on time, and I guess I'd just like to thank our expert panels again, and thank each of you audience members that joined us today. As a reminder, we will send out an email after the webinar with a link, and we will follow up on your FAQs. But I'd just like to thank all of you for taking time to join this discussion today. We've barely scratched the surface in 60 minutes, but we certainly hope that you are leaving today with some new ideas and some information that you can apply in your own teams, your own organizations, and for your own personal engagement. So panel, audience, thank you all so much, and stay safe out there. Thank you everybody for joining.